truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, March 8th, 2024, the 1143rd day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at I'mYourModerator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free a couple days later on a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Okay, so we will get into the fake president's fake State of the Union in just a bit, but let's start with some social media and tech stories. Elon Musk has received a letter from the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee. This was reported yesterday by Axios. The headline over there, if you want to check this out, Democrats launched SpaceX probe over Russian use of Starlink satellites. House Democrats are launching an investigation into Elon Musk's SpaceX over concerns that Russian forces have obtained the company's internet satellite terminals per a letter sent Wednesday. Ukraine has relied on SpaceX's Starlink in its counteroffensives against Russia, the letter said, and the U.S. government has poured resources into supporting Ukraine. Starlink delivers high-speed broadband internet via a low Earth orbit to users all over the world. Okay, so this is a story that we talked about last year. There was a lot of upset at Elon at various points over the last 2 years that the Russia-Ukraine quote-unquote war has been going on. Last fall, he was publicly blamed for an incident from a year earlier. They said that Elon turned off Starlink for the Ukrainians who were trying to make offensive moves at that point. The idea being that they wanted to launch attacks and Elon was making it impossible. Now, the necessary point that the media never seems to mention and that people often forget is that Elon is the highest recipient of Defense Department contracts in the country. And the United States is waging a proxy war in Ukraine. That is what we are told. We are told Joe Biden is the real president of the United States of America and the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. The fake president is clearly on the side of Ukraine, the side of the global regime in their stronghold of Ukraine. He clearly has a stake in the outcome of the quote-unquote war. And with that in mind, what sense does it make that the number one recipient of Defense Department funding is making it impossible for the real commander-in-chief to achieve his aims in a foreign war, while nothing is done by this so-called commander-in-chief? It does not make sense now. It never has made sense, and it never will. But let's get into this letter signed by Jamie Raskin and Robert Garcia because it's kind of interesting. It's just good to hear all of the context, the way they perceive Elon and SpaceX and Starlink. We write with great concern that Russian forces may have illicitly obtained and used Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX, owned Starlink internet satellite terminals. Starlink, a division of SpaceX, provides users with high-speed broadband internet access and is, quote, often the only way to get internet access in war zones, remote areas, and places hit by natural disasters, end quote. Starlink is an invaluable resource for Ukrainians in their fight against Russia's brutal and illegitimate invasion. It is alarming that Russia may be obtaining and using your technology to coordinate attacks against Ukrainian troops in illegally occupied regions in eastern and southern Ukraine, potentially in violation of U.S. sanctions and export controls. So they're figuring out a way that Elon Musk might have broken the law. In February 2022, Russia illegally invaded Ukraine and launched numerous cyber attacks against Ukraine's energy and telecommunications infrastructures to weaken Ukraine's position both on and off the battlefield. Within hours of Russia's attack, the Ukrainian government asked your company to authorize Starlink terminals to provide Ukraine internet access for essential civilian and military needs, and SpaceX delivered satellite kits to Ukraine. The United States supports Ukraine's access to Starlink, and in June 2023, SpaceX entered into a contract with the Department of Defense to purchase 400 to 500 new Starlink terminals and services for Ukraine. As of September 2023, 42,000 Starlink terminals had been deployed in Ukraine for, quote, military, hospitals, businesses, and aid organizations, end quote. So just to be clear here, Elon sent Starlink satellites to Ukraine when that mean old Vladimir Putin first launched his very brutal invasion, and then they got a new contract in January 2023. But in the meantime, in like October, I think it was, of 2022, Elon got blamed for not supplying Ukraine with Starlink, for turning it off when they wanted to launch attacks. So that was in October, despite the fact that we didn't hear about it until last fall, so nearly a year later. And in the middle, the fake president gave Elon Musk another contract for more Starlinks in Ukraine. That is what the real president, Joe Biden, did, while Elon was actually thwarting the goals in Ukraine of the fake president's administration. That does not make sense.
But ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, I have one final thing I want you to consider. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chewbacca. Chewbacca is a Wookiee from the planet Kashyyyk, but Chewbacca lives on the planet Endor. Now think about that. That does not make sense. Damn it.
What?
He's using the Chewbacca defense. Why would a Wookiee, an 8-foot-tall Wookiee, want to live on Endor with a bunch of 2-foot-tall Ewoks? That does not make sense. But more important, you have to ask yourself, what does this have to do with this case? Nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with this case. It does not make sense. Look at me. I'm a lawyer defending a major record company, and I'm talking about Chewbacca. Does that make sense? Ladies and gentlemen, I am not making any sense. None of this makes sense. And so you have to remember, when you're in that jury room deliberating and conjugating the Emancipation Proclamation, does it make sense? No. Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, it does not make sense. If Chewbacca lives on Endor, you must acquit. The defense rests.
What can I say? It's Friday and I love South Park. But let's get back to the letter from Jamie Raskin. To disrupt Russia's economic, financial, and military capabilities, the federal government worked with allies and partners to implement new sanctions and export controls on Russia, and has taken enforcement actions against U.S. exporters and third parties that seek to evade sanctions and export laws. On February 21st, 2022, President Biden issued an executive order that would prohibit transactions, trade, or new investment in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Following this executive order, the Department of Commerce implemented a series of export controls to restrict Russia's access to certain technologies. The Department of Commerce also provided information to U.S. private exporters stating that Russia routinely relies on evasive or deceptive tactics, such as the use of third-party intermediaries or transshipment points, thereby circumventing restrictions. In 2023, the Departments of Commerce, the Treasury, and Justice repeatedly issued joint compliance notes, alerts, and guidance to U.S. private industry, specifically noting Russian efforts to illegally obtain technology and items through obfuscated third parties. The substantial sanctions and export controls levied by the United States and our allies have blocked efforts that would or could aid Russia's nefarious aggression against Ukraine. However, Russia has sought to evade these sanctions. On February 11, 2024, Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, the GUR, released intercepted audio communications between Russian soldiers that indicated Russian forces had illegally deployed and activated Starlink terminals in certain Russian-occupied areas in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence officials assert that Russian forces have obtained Starlink terminals illegally through third-party actors via neighboring countries. Russia's misuse of Starlink terminals outside Russia's internationally recognized borders poses a serious threat to Ukrainian security, Ukrainian lives, and U.S. national security. How does it pose any threat to U.S. national security? But let's continue. SpaceX Chief Executive Officer Elon Musk publicly stated that, to the best of our knowledge, no Starlinks have been sold directly or indirectly to Russia. However, according to Ukraine, the misuse of Starlink terminals is systemic, raising additional questions about the efficacy of your company's safeguards and compliance with U.S. sanctions and export controls. We are concerned that you may not have appropriate guardrails and policies in place to ensure your technology is neither acquired directly or indirectly, nor used illegally by Russia. Now, I want to go back a bit to something that caught my eye. It's possible this is nothing, but it's an interesting turn of phrase at minimum. In this letter, Raskin and Garcia write, on February 21st, 2022, so this is before Putin's very brutal invasion, President Biden issued an executive order that would prohibit transactions, trade, or new investment where? In Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. What could that possibly mean? Putin hadn't launched his very brutal invasion at that point. So which Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine does he mean? Does he mean Crimea, where they had already had a referendum to become part of Russia? They weren't part of Ukraine. They haven't been part of Ukraine since 2014. Putin hadn't launched his very brutal invasion at that point. So what could it mean that there were Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine? It's very strange. And this is about investments in the region. An executive order that would prohibit transactions, trade, or new investment in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. So if you assume that they are discussing the Donbass here, which one would think they must be discussing, why would they want the prohibitions on those regions? Wouldn't they still just want these prohibitions to be for actual Russians? I mean, it's Ukrainians that live in those regions too, right? Who's being supplied? Is it those Ukrainians, or is it the Ukrainians in Kyiv, led by the comedic actor? Which set of Ukrainians is it? Because they're talking about regions of Russian-occupied Ukraine, and they're not just saying Russians. So who is it that is being prohibited from transactions and these other deals? And then, of course, you have to remember that those regions are the ones who have been the targets of an ethnic civil war now for 10 years, led by that global regime and their proxy government in the total puppet state of Ukraine. That's led by that very same government in Kyiv, utilizing those very same Nazi battalions. And oh, by the way, all of those various intel units set up by our CIA, as revealed in no place short of the New York Times just 2 weeks ago. So just by basic logic and deductive reasoning, the people who were having transactions restricted must have been those people in those regions targeted by that ethnic civil war led by the regime in Kyiv on behalf of the global regime in coordination with the fake president who's handing down the sanctions. Now, are they worried that Elon Musk is supplying those Ukrainians? Why are the sanctions and prohibitions targeting them? And when we look back historically and think about the Trump administration operating in quote unquote Ukraine and sending supplies or equipment or armaments to quote unquote Ukraine, could this be the distinction? Are we talking good twin, evil twin in Ukraine? Of course we are. And of course there's a good twin and evil twin. That's kind of what it means when there's an ethnic civil war going on. Now, the other thing is that people in those regions who are referred to as Ukrainians are actually of Slavic ethnicity. So in some sense, they absolutely are Russians and they speak Russian. So is that what they mean by saying the Russian occupied regions of Ukraine? Are those people not allowed to live in those regions because they're Russia? Is that what it means to have an ethnic civil war? Oh, yes, it is. It's strange, isn't it, that the United States of America and its evil twin faction are on the side of these people so clearly. And let's focus in on another part of the last paragraph we read. Russia's misuse of Starlink terminals outside Russia's internationally recognized borders poses a serious threat to Ukraine's security, Ukrainian lives, and U.S. national security. So this is Jamie Raskin Fryer-Koch writing on behalf of the global regime, the global evil twin, claiming that Ukrainian security and Ukrainian lives, and by that he means the Ukrainian evil twin, the government in Kyiv, and those who align with them, and of course fretting about U.S. national security, because without that statement, the justifications go away. It has to be about our security. It can't just be about this corrupt proxy state on the other side of the globe. And when these people talk about U.S. national security, they're not talking about the security of your life and your home and your property and our borders. They're talking about the security of the evil twin faction uniparty government in the United States of America, their rule over the people, and the rule of the global regime's fiat currency currently branded as the U.S. dollar. They want to preserve those two things on their terms, on the terms of the regime. That is what they mean by U.S. national security. They want to be secure with their hold over the nation. So what do they mean by outside of Russia's internationally recognized borders? Why couldn't you just say Russia's borders? You have to add on internationally recognized. That is an appeal to an authority. The authority there is the United Nations. They've drawn the lines of these maps in the deals they made during and after the Cold War, just like they did in the Middle East after World War II. Those in control of the global regime fund both sides of the war until they're able to kill off enough brave, strong, patriotic men to thwart the resistance to their plans in both countries, and then they draw new lines on the map. And they say, this is what we all recognize. Don't we all agree, members of the United Nations? Oh, yes, we all agree. See that? These are now internationally recognized borders, and that's that. Back to the letter. Russian procurement of, use of, or interference with Starlink terminals each has the potential to advance Russia's brutal and illegitimate invasion of Ukraine. It's amazing how many times they have to repeat those slogans. Russian President Vladimir Putin personally provoked this conflict with a peaceful neighbor, and his actions have threatened all democratic neighbors and institutions. 2 years later, it remains critical that Russia be deprived of any trade that empowers its military. To assist committee Democrats in review of this matter, please respond on behalf of SpaceX and its subdivision Starlink to the following questions, as well as provide a staff briefing on the issue no later than March 20th, 2024. Honestly, I cannot imagine receiving this letter and doing anything with it other than balling it up and throwing it in the trash while laughing. But here are the questions. How many reports or complaints has SpaceX received regarding possible illegal acquisition, trade, or use of Starlink terminals, including in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine? How many reports or complaints has SpaceX examined? 2. How does SpaceX assess, review, or evaluate reports or complaints related to the possible illegal acquisition, trade, or use of Starlink terminals, including in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine? What guidance and or policies does SpaceX have to prevent illegal acquisition, trade, or use of Starlink terminals? What guidance and or policies does SpaceX follow if it determines an actor has illegally acquired, traded, or used Starlink terminals? What actions has SpaceX taken to ensure Starlink users are compliant with U.S. sanctions and export control laws, including U.S. sanctions and export controls related to Russia? Sounds like they want to get a list of all Starlink users in the United States of America so they can accuse everyone of buying Starlink to send it to Russians. And let's just close this out. Number 6 and 7. What actions has SpaceX taken or considered taking to eliminate existing or potential security vulnerabilities that actors such as Russia may exploit to illicitly acquire, trade, or use Starlink terminals, including in Russian-occupied regions in Ukraine? How does SpaceX and its subdivisions work with the Department of Justice, Commerce, and Treasury to prevent illicit acquisition, trade, or use of satellite terminals, including in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine? So you can look at this letter and understand immediately that the basis for this letter, as they describe it, is not true. So then the question becomes, what is the real reason they are searching for this information? Do they want information on Starlink's customers? Quite possible. Do they want to know where all these Starlink terminals are? Maybe. Are they trying to make Elon Musk's life as difficult as possible? Probably. Are they trying to actually increase their control over Starlink? And that, to me, is the most likely option. We see with Elon what we saw with Trump, obviously in a smaller form, but just lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. Whatever they can find, whatever they can pursue, they want as much information as they can possibly get, and they want to do everything they can to thwart their opponent, whether it's Elon, whether it's Trump. I'm sure there is nothing they would love more than to figure out a way to pin their Ukraine failures on someone like Elon Musk and then try to get him out of the picture. Ultimately, they're going to try to attack the means of communication among Americans at some point this year. You have to expect that at some point between now and the election, or even that post-election period. There are quite a few indications that Starlink might be that backup system, that infrastructure that won't fail when they try to turn everything off. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing that Elon Musk and that company and that infrastructure could have that much control, but that just might be the future we're entering. And if communications and the rest of it can be properly decentralized and then immune to censorship, maybe that problem can be mitigated. Maybe people turn away from technology at some point. It could happen. But regardless, this seems to be another case where the regime is trying to pry further control away from these people who clearly seem to have power in opposition to the regime's demands. People are worried that Elon might be evil. If he is, it doesn't seem to be on behalf of that global regime. He could be controlled opposition. I don't deny that, but I also don't think that he is. And I sure hope that he's not. Also in the tech domain, let's discuss TikTok, the company who, quote unquote, everybody knows is an asset of the CCP. And we know that's true, of course, because all sides agree that it's true. And there's no other reason they would ever say that other than it absolutely is true. Now, does that make it true? And should we be horrified? No, it doesn't. And no, we shouldn't. Why? Because if we're talking good twin, evil twin in a one-party state, then everybody in politics is going to be from that one party. And when the government has its hands in and has connections with all of the powerful corporations in the country, then every company is associated with that government and with that one state party. Now, communism is absolutely awful, and the evil twin faction in China has committed absolute atrocities in the name of communism in China. So I'm not denying any of that. And they're engaged in espionage and unfair trade practices and currency manipulation and the rest of it. I am 100% on board with what people say about all that. But if a country is emerging out of communism and out of having a one-party state and out of the sort of governmental structure that has its hands in every corporation in the country, then simply understanding the association with that one party doesn't get the job done. It's a very accurate indicator. It's something good to think about. You got to parse it. You got to understand which direction it goes. But you can't just rely on that to draw your conclusions about any given individual or entity. And perhaps it's easier to understand that if you understand the one-party system in China, the Chinese Communist Party, in parallel to the one-party system in America, the Uniparty. Now, the Uniparty composes both Democrats and Republicans. Most Trump supporters are on board with Republicans. Many have been for a very long time. Are there Republicans beyond Trump who you do like, despite understanding that they were part of that Uniparty? The answer is almost definitely yes. And from an outsider's perspective, Trump would have been a member of the Republican Party and the head of the American government while the Uniparty is in power, and that would mean Trump was part of the Uniparty. Now, I actually got that argument from Ron DeSantis supporters, and those people aren't very smart. They think they've proven that Trump is really part of the Uniparty based on some technicality. But I'm only concerned about whose interests he's serving, and at every turn he was not serving the interests of the Uniparty. In fact, he was working against those interests. So to then hold him responsible for an association with the Uniparty doesn't make sense. So not only is claiming that TikTok is bad because of its association with the Chinese Communist Party not conclusive, it also becomes immediately hypocritical as soon as you realize that Facebook, Twitter, Google, Snapchat, all the rest, they have the same regime connections that the Chinese Communist Party has with the regime. All of these companies are global partners of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is like the quintessential hub of the global regime governments and corporations. So if you're mad at TikTok for their association with that global regime, then you have to be mad at Facebook and the rest of them for their association with that global regime. Now, which one of these companies is the global regime getting publicly mad at? Is it Meta or is it TikTok? It's TikTok. Now, I'm not saying TikTok's good. I'm saying I don't know, and I would suggest that you might not know either. And I think in that case, it's not a great idea to push for the banning of a communications channel alongside the Uniparty. Now, I don't care if TikTok exists or not. I would love it. I would love it if all social media just died. And maybe not forever, but a couple of weeks, just so that people could readjust to having a real life again. If Instagram ended tomorrow, I think it would be such a wonderful moment for the world. So I'm not trying to protect the platform. I just don't like it when the way I'm thinking about something lines up with the people on TV on both sides. If I am saying something that the people on MSNBC and CNN and Fox all agree with, and that both sides of the uniparty establishment in Congress or in the Senate agree with, or something Joe Biden's also pushing that could immediately cut off a communications channel and empower people like Mark Zuckerberg we know to be bad actors, I gotta give it a second thought. We've gotten to the point where MAGA has a knee-jerk reaction about TikTok every time it's mentioned. Oh, that's CCP technology. Tucker showed us that they show us these videos that change our kids' minds in ways that they don't show videos to the Chinese. Okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. All the social media platforms are very, very bad. I feel like I've probably spent as much time on that as anyone in this space. But it's not singularly bad. They're all bad. Every tool the regime uses and wields against us is bad, and they use all the tools they can access. But as someone who was censored directly and provably by his own government, I don't want to give that government more power to shut down platforms or the people on them. Now, again, I don't care if you agree with me, if you believe me, but let's just approach the material from that open mindset, and then you make up your mind for yourself. This is from CNN yesterday, as everyone was getting ready for Joe Biden's big State of the Union. This news just drops. House panel unanimously approves bill that could ban TikTok. A powerful House committee advanced a bill on Thursday that could lead to a nationwide ban against TikTok on all electronic devices, renewing lawmakers' challenge to one of the world's most popular social media apps and highlighting unresolved fears that TikTok may pose a Chinese government spying risk. And we are talking, by the way, about the same regime in the United States of America that has made the Chinese Communist Party so powerful. They are not credible when it comes to China. If they tell me that they're going to do something on my behalf in order to counteract China while being allies of China and the very people who empowered China, I'm not going to believe them. I also don't think about the world as these individual countries. China, to me, is not China. China is two things. I want to make sure the global regime's power in China is eroded at the same time the people of China can be uplifted and seize control of their country. It does not make sense to think China good or China bad. China is both things. Just like the U.S. is both things, just like every place is both things. The measure that sailed unanimously through the House Energy and Commerce Committee would prohibit TikTok from U.S. app stores unless the social media platform used by roughly 170 million Americans is quickly spun off from its China-linked parent company, ByteDance. If enacted, the bill would give ByteDance 165 days, or a little more than 5 months, to sell TikTok. If not divested by that date, it would be illegal for App Store operators such as Apple and Google to make it available for download. The bill also contemplates similar prohibitions for other apps, quote, controlled by foreign adversary companies, end quote. It's the most aggressive legislation targeting TikTok to come out of a congressional committee since company CEO Shu Chu testified to lawmakers last year that the app poses no threat to Americans. Today, we will take the first step in creating long overdue laws to protect Americans from the threat posed by apps controlled by our adversaries and to send a very strong message that the U.S. will always stand up for our values and freedom, said Washington Republican Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers, the panel's chair. New Jersey Rep. Frank Pallone, its ranking Democrat, compared the bill to prior efforts to regulate the U.S. airwaves, citing testimony from national security officials from a closed-door hearing earlier Thursday. Now that it is cleared committee, the TikTok legislation will head to a floor vote next week. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said in a post on X Thursday evening, its fate is less clear in the Senate, where there is no companion bill, and the Democratic chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, Washington Senator Maria Cantwell, has made no firm commitment to advance the proposal. House lawmakers voted unanimously in the same session Thursday to advance a second bill, one that would limit U.S. companies' ability to sell Americans' personal information to foreign adversaries. U.S. officials have cited the widespread commercial availability of U.S. citizens' data as another source of national security risk. The U.S. government and other domestic law enforcement agencies are also known to have purchased U.S. citizens' data from commercial data brokers. Oh, so they're the consumer. That's where all the data is going. It's going directly to the government and, of course, to our foreign adversaries, because the evil twin faction, our uniparty government, does in fact work with our foreign adversaries. They don't consider them adversaries. They consider them partners. They only become adversaries when their leaders need replaced or they begin doing things that work against the implementation of the global regime's agenda. Here is some of TikTok's response. This legislation has a predetermined outcome, a total ban of TikTok in the United States. The government is attempting to strip 170 million Americans of their constitutional right to free expression. This will damage millions of businesses, deny artists an audience, and destroy the livelihoods of countless creators across the country. During Thursday's session, Texas Republican Representative Dan Crenshaw dismissed criticisms that lawmakers didn't understand the technology they were trying to regulate. He said it's not because we're old and grumpy and don't understand TikTok and how you use it for your business and how you use it to communicate with your friends. He said, I was on social media long before any of the Gen Zers who are mad about TikTok. I understand. Dan Crenshaw is a clown. So TikTok had that statement on the app in a notice to users asking them to contact Congress and get involved and tell Congress not to ban TikTok. Gizmodo has an article on those reactions saying that the reactions backfired, actually enraging Congress and causing them to go even harder on this ban. So the notification that TikTok sent its users featured a space to enter the zip code and a call now button that would immediately call their local Congress member. The Gizmodo article says TikTok has over 150 million American users, and a bill making its way through Congress could cut access to all of them. Bipartisan lawmakers from the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party authored this bill. The bill would ban TikTok from U.S. app stores unless the app's parent company, China-based ByteDance, gives up control of TikTok. Now, Mike Gallagher was the head of that committee. Mike Gallagher is not running for another term in Congress. You got to wonder why. He was a young and up-and-coming Republican congressman. The only problem was that he was a member of the Uniparty. The guy was a frequent guest on Jonah Goldberg's podcast. Jonah Goldberg is one of those very serious conservatives at the Dispatch. He goes on television and lectures everyone about what it is like to be a real conservative while supporting Democrats. Do I trust legislation that emerges from Mike Gallagher and gets unanimous approval in a bipartisan committee? No, I don't. There is no legislation that should be passed by this illegitimate Congress, and no legislation that should be passed by the illegitimate Senate, and no legislation that should be signed by the illegitimate president. I don't want any decisions of this magnitude being made with these clowns pretending to be in office. I especially don't want them banning the access of everybody to a communications platform, especially when the very same people are using the other platforms to censor us in league with the platforms. You can't just scream Chinese Communist Party at me over and over and over again and expect, oh, yeah, okay, well, you guys got it this time. Same as the whole paragliding go-karts thing. You said the magic words, and now I have to agree with you. Well, no, we don't do that anymore. The magic words are not enough. Convince everyone it must be done over time, having answered all the appropriate questions, and then the American people will allow you to move forward on their behalf. You don't represent us, Congress. That's part of what it means to be illegitimate. And isn't it amazing that what they are forcing is the sale of the app to another party? It's got to go away from ByteDance. That will somehow sever its connection permanently with the Chinese Communist Party. But no, it won't. If anything emerging from Elon regarding Twitter can be believed, then he's had problems now for a year and a half trying to fix the problems created by the regime when they had control over Twitter. Imagine how long that would take for TikTok. And who would end up purchasing it? Who would take over control of TikTok, this communications platform that has 170 million American users? Is it going to be the good guys or the bad guys? Could it be a bad guy disguised as a good guy and we wouldn't know it? Yeah, that could totally happen, and everyone would do it cheering. And of course, if Congress is going to force the sale, then Congress has got to be able to approve who they're selling it to, right? They can't just Sell it off to another company with bad associations. You would just be recreating the same problem or continuing the old one. So Congress is going to have to control who it's sold to. Do you trust these illegitimate politicians to make that decision? I sure don't. And one other note from this article. The bill would allow the FBI and other intelligence agencies to identify social media apps under the control of foreign adversaries such as TikTok. Then the president could ban these products from online app stores. There's an exception to the ban requiring the app to cut ties with foreign adversaries within 180 days of designation. NBC reports the bill will be sent to the House floor on Thursday for a future vote. TikTok says this is an outright ban, despite Congress noting there is an option to avoid the ban by divesting from ByteDance. So it's not just TikTok. TikTok is the target of the PR campaign to pass this bill, but this bill doesn't target only TikTok. Again, the bill would allow the FBI and other intelligence agencies to identify social media apps under the control of foreign adversaries, such as TikTok. Then the president could ban these products from online app stores. Okay, so what if they decide there is some foreign connection to Telegram? And of course, there is a foreign connection to Telegram. Telegram is owned by a Russian named Pavel Durov, who was also the founder of Russia's kind of quasi-Facebook called VK. We've seen the regime and the media go after Telegram before. Do you want the fake president to have the power to force the app stores to remove Telegram from the App Store so that all the millions of Americans who are on it can no longer use it? Is that something we want to empower the illegitimate president to do? Now, you'll remember that Donald Trump tried to shut down TikTok in 2020, and he was stopped by the courts. So you'd think that Trump would come out in support of this bill, but he didn't. Instead, he posted on Truth Social, if you get rid of TikTok, Facebook and Zuckerschmuck will double their business. I don't want Facebook, who cheated in the last election, to do better. They are a true enemy of the people. Now, all you have to do is understand that Facebook and TikTok are roughly equivalent when it comes to how much you can feel safe on those apps and trust those apps, that they are not trying to manipulate you into bad decisions, that they are not stealing your data and your biometrics. They're all doing that. Everybody knows they're all doing that. Are you more scared of the CCP or are you more scared of the Uniparty in your own country? I'll tell you what, I'm more concerned about the Uniparty in my country. I'm not worried about the CCP. The Uniparty in my government already gave them my data. And you gotta wonder how many citizens in our country have given them their DNA through Ancestry or 23andMe or through the COVID tests or whatever else. All of that toothpaste is out of the tube. If they can't influence you and can't get your data from TikTok, they're going to get it from somewhere else. In fact, they're already getting it from other places. So eliminating TikTok doesn't even make you safer. And we talked about Telegram. What if they decide to say that Donald Trump has some foreign investor or foreign partner involved in DWAC or TMTG or the Rumble Cloud or whatever else, and then they try to shut down Rumble and Truth Social? I don't want the illegitimate president having that power, and you shouldn't either. And then take just one more step here. And again, I've never been on TikTok. I've never had it on my phone. I've seen it. I've seen videos. I understand what the platform is about a little bit. I couldn't even make one of those videos if I tried right now. I have no familiarity with the app whatsoever. So understand that I don't care. I don't like Instagram. I think it's a demoralization machine. I think it makes people narcissistic and annoying. I can't stand Instagram influencers. I can't stand TikTok influencers. I don't like any of it. So this is not about my personal preferences. But people love them some TikTok. People spend all their time on TikTok. I think that's terrible, but it doesn't change the reality. Influencers on TikTok reach a whole lot of people. And I don't like the job they do. I don't like how they make their money. But that's not my business, and that's not the point. What do you think happens when all those users and all those influencers all agree that the Congress and the illegitimate president are trying to take away one of the most important things in their life. Now, again, you can make your judgments on that, but it is true regardless of whether it's good. And if you tell all these people that the thing they love is going to be taken away and it's this guy's fault, they're going to be real mad at that guy. And they did get mad at Donald Trump in 2020 for threatening to do that. Guess who they're going to blame this time around? Not Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the guy out there saying, you can't ban TikTok. TikTok's no worse than Facebook. In fact, Facebook participated in election theft. And all of Con Inc., because this is an irresistible narrative to them, they will push this and say, Donald Trump is supporting this CCP app. You should hate Donald Trump. Members of the Uniparty left will do the same thing. They think they'll be able to own Donald Trump on this one while simultaneously looking patriotic, even though no one will believe it. And they'll all try to own the maggots by sending Donald Trump's truth post around everywhere so everyone can be reminded about how Mark Zuckerberg helped steal the election and how Mark Zuckerberg's company steals all your data and they manipulate you just like TikTok. And then everyone on TikTok, all the users, all the influencers are going to know that the Congress and the illegitimate president are trying to destroy TikTok rather than going after the other social media apps. And they're going to think Donald Trump is actually the one who is looking to protect TikTok. I make my enormous living on this platform. Maybe Trump ain't so bad. And I think it's important to understand what these narrative manipulations are. Trump is changing his identity so that the American people's view on an issue becomes part of Trump's identity. For instance, the American people are anti-immigration now. A smaller portion of the American people were anti-immigration 9 years ago when Donald Trump was coming down that golden escalator and he was saying they're not sending their best. Rapists, murderers, drug traffickers, etc., cartel members. He was called racist. He said he was going to build the wall and get Mexico to pay for it. They tried to stop him building the wall, and despite Mexico sending 28,000 soldiers, they claim that Mexico never paid for the border security. Donald Trump enacted travel bans to stop terrorism and to stop COVID. It was part of Trump's identity that he was anti-immigrant. They called him racist. They called him xenophobic. They transferred those claims to all of his supporters and called them all collectively racist and xenophobic because they were so anti-immigrant. And now they're trying to say that Donald Trump is soft on immigration. Donald Trump killed this immigration bill that would have secured our border because he was concerned about the presidential race this fall. No one believes it because the identity has already been set. Everyone identifies Trump and MAGA as anti-immigrant. You're not just able to change that with a couple of stories. Donald Trump is now fully identified with the position of the American people when it comes to immigration. If you care about immigration, you vote for Donald Trump, period. There's nothing else. That's why it works. That's what he's doing. That's what the process is for. No one can credibly claim that Donald Trump is an ally or a partner of the CCP. Donald Trump put massive tariffs on China. Donald Trump was doing an economic decoupling from China and bringing manufacturing that was in China using Chinese slave labor set up by this global regime. And he was bringing that back on shore into America. Donald Trump is not pro-China. It doesn't matter how many times he says Xi Jinping is smart. Xi Jinping is smart. Donald Trump is just telling the truth, and he can't be punished for it because everybody knows he's not pro-China. He blamed China for COVID over and over again. He called it the China virus. He says it comes from China. He bans travel, and they called him racist and xenophobic and anti-science and a conspiracy theorist and all the rest. No one will ever believe that Donald Trump is just a puppet of China. It's preposterous. At the same time, they know that Joe Biden is a puppet of China. So Donald Trump has preserved his anti-China-ness while attracting all of those TikTok users and influencers who now understand that their livelihoods are dependent on people whose views oppose Donald Trump's. While Donald Trump is saying he's going to protect their livelihood while these other people are taking it away, because apps in America that no one talks about are as bad or worse. And Meta certainly is. Think about the recent and historical centers of Democrat Party power in their ability to tell a convincing story to the American public about how they're winning these elections. Black voters, gone. They're moving toward Trump. Hispanic voters, gone. They're moving toward Trump. Women are moving toward Trump. Working class people are moving toward Trump. Union workers are moving toward Trump. He hasn't quite got the celebrities yet, but getting TikTok influencers is pretty damn close. The guy really does know what he's doing. And guys, I think I'm actually going to wrap it up there for the day. I was going to talk about the State of the Union, but I did a broadcast on Badlands Media last night. I would just end up rehashing some of my points that you can find there before the speech and then after the speech. You can go to rumble.com/Badlands Media or just search Badlands Media on Rumble and then just filter by upload date. You will find it back there. I was also on Badlands Daily this morning with CanCon, and we discussed a few other aspects of it. And there's like a million podcasts you can hear State of the Union coverage on. So I will be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's high!